So today I want to discuss some of the false doctrines that have been going around. My wife was sent recently a video by a doctor, and most people just believe everything because somebody has an MD or whatever it is degree behind their name. But we ought to be faithful Bereans. We ought to use the Bible, science, BSC method, common sense, right? And so, BSC is, I got that from Barbara O'Neill, and I think it's a really good way to do things. There's a lot of people that claim all kinds of things, which are just not correct, right? And how do we know what correct is? Well, we can know what correct is by comparing things to Scripture. We can know what's correct by understanding the pre-flood environment. We can know what's correct by studying true science, and that is our foundation. So this doctor recommended getting rid of all seed oils, and we know that seed oils can be detrimental because they can easily be damaged. But there are seed oils which are not easily damaged, and one of those is coconut, of course. Olive oil is also not as easily damaged and can be used. And as far as I know, avocado oil also is not as easily damaged. But if we think of the use of oils, because the seed oils are so easily damaged, we really shouldn't be using sunflower oil. We shouldn't be using pumpkin seed oil. We shouldn't be using flax oil. Those things are so easily damaged that they actually have to be put in no light conditions besides refrigeration, or they become carcinogenic. And so the seed oil that we should be using is coconut oil. And if we're using olive oil, that should be kept in a cold environment where light is not exposed to it. Obviously, the best way is to take it directly out of the plant or to eat the plant directly, right? So we can go to extremes. No-fat diet leads to dementia. And so those who engage in a no-fat diet will, you can see their inability to think. And the email that my wife received was from an individual which is into a no-fat diet. And that's maybe one of the reasons that there is an inability to think and reason, right? So the particular doctor indicated that we ought to go back to using butter and ghee. And particularly he went into ghee. Ghee is basically butter which they've removed all the milk solids. And that does make it more digestible because the casein and other milk solids are not easily digested. And so, yes, ghee is more digestible than butter, but alcohol contains some beneficial phytochemicals, and so does tobacco. But that doesn't mean we ought to use them, right? That's not a good reason for us to use these things. We want something that's all good. Not just something that is all good except for a poison that it contains. So we shouldn't be using, inspiration tells us that we're not to use butter even on hot bread because it damages the oil. And so we know that we should not be using butter, and it's indigestible. And it should not be used for frying. In fact, when it is used for frying, it releases harmful free radicals. And the smoke from the butter contains polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, aldehydes, which are associated with high cancer risk. So that's the reason that if you are in a home where people cook with any type of animal fat, those people are actually creating cancer in their loved ones. And it's a very selfish decision for anybody to do that. I know homes where the husband insists on eating meat and cooking and frying with it, fries his eggs in the morning in butter. And what he is doing is he's harming or damaging or killing his family. And that is breaking the seventh commandment, which is murder, right? So let's move on to ghee. So just because ghee is more digestible than some of your seed oils, which have been damaged, or ghee is more digestible than butter, does that mean that it should be the substitute we should be using now? We should substitute for all our seed oils ghee? Well, not a good idea. Why? Because we know that animals concentrate environmental toxins in their system. So if there's Roundup or glyphosates, which blocks mineral absorption, then we ought not to eat things which block those mineral absorption. So the same person that sent us this article is also very into minerals, which is great. We need as many minerals in the body as possible. But the way to get them is not to return to meats which contain environmental toxins, glyphosates, which block mineral absorption, and other environmental toxins such as pesticides, heavy metals. That's really not the solution to get minerals in your diet. First of all, the minerals in animal products are not easily metabolized or absorbed, so it would be foolish to go to animals to get the minerals you're getting them secondhand. Where do the animals get them? That should be the answer. Well, they're not getting them from eating meat. The other day, the same individual indicated that we should be looking into not eating peanuts, because it's been shown that bears that eat peanuts get peanuts contain a toxin in them, especially when they're molding. And the toxin is really not created from the peanuts itself, but from the mold. And therefore, because it gave bears problems, we ought to not eat them. But there's a study that was done in the Philippines, and one of the authors of the China study, in which they studied vegetarians, which were basically Filipinos which had very little money, so they ate no meat because they could not afford it, compared to wealthy Filipinos. And they found that even though the wealthy Filipinos ate very little meat, that they came down with diseases from the peanuts, while the poor Filipinos that ate more peanuts didn't come down with them. And the reason was animal fats. So the fact that a bear is an omnivore, and yes, they eat berries, that's the reason they're called bears, but those are only available seasonally. So the whole idea that a bear eats vegetable matter all year long is really not correct from a biological perspective. And so the fact that the bear is damaged by peanuts indicates that just a tiny bit of meat is going to damage you if you're eating just the smallest amount. So the environmental pollutants and heavy metals tend to bioaccumulate in animals' fat, such as ghee. So if you want to get the highest levels of biotoxins, eat ghee. Studies show that commercial ghee can carry residues of organochloride, pesticides, DDT, and other industrial toxins, such as, of course, glyphosates. We should be focusing instead on consuming mono and polyunsaturated fats in our diets. And best if those diets are found in the natural form, because they are packaged with the enzymes and they're water soluble, so very easy to digest. So those fats are included in avocados, nuts, seeds, and other plant-based foods. Coconut is a short-chain fatty acid. Although it is a saturated fat, it is water soluble, it's short-chain, and it's digestible starting in the mouth. And so coconut oil is the best if you're going to consume an oil. Obviously, the even better than coconut oil is eating the coconut whole, right? And so it's very digestible. So another thing we heard recently from a health reformer is this particular individual indicated that we ought to close our eyes when they're in the sun so the sun hits your eyelids, and then expose the palms to the sun to create maximal vitamin D. And so whenever someone says something, I am a very skeptical person. I want evidence for everything. And because there's a lot of things that are going around, and it's this same individual had also indicated that we should never use a pressure cooker. Also indicated that a lot of things that are not true. Pressure cooking is simulating the environment, pre-flood environment, and especially for legumes, it removes the phytochemicals that prevent protein digestion. And so we ought to use a pressure cooker, especially with legumes. And it's also been shown with vegetables to increase the antioxidants. So the idea of not using, now I'm not saying you can't boil. Sometimes we have to just let things boil. There's no problem. In fact, there's no problem to do that type of thing. And so vitamin D is produced. Now, if you look online, it will tell you no, but remember, let's not trust Google. Let's look for scientific studies. So vitamin D is produced in the eyes. There's a scientific study that says this. This can be found on PubMed, 3545741, okay? It says vitamin D is produced in the eyes and eyeballs in relation to prevention of ocular disease. So if you want to prevent disease in the eyes, you need to be out in the sun, not to look at the sun, but to be exposed to sunlight, such as myopathy, age-related macular degeneration, glaucoma, diabetic retinopathy, dry eye syndrome, thyroid disease. All of these can be prevented by exposing the eyeball to sun. God created us to be in connection with nature and to be out in the sunlight. The whole idea we have today is that we need to avoid the sun. This comes from the enemy of souls. This is not true, okay? Vitamin D production is maximized by, some have taught that vitamin D production is maximized by exposure of the eyelids and palms. I cannot find any evidence in the scientific literature. It doesn't make sense. It's not common sense that God would make us that we had to go out in the sun. When you're working out in the sun, are you working with your eyelids closed and your palms exposed? Or are you working with the hoe and the shovel and most of the top of the hand, and the eye would be exposed, and the face and the rest of the arms and the body, those would be exposed. So the idea that we're maximizing production by doing some odd, strange movement in the sun is not sound common sense. It doesn't make sense with respect to the biblical record. God designed us to get the vitamin D, all that we need, by just exposure to the sun. Working in the garden, we don't have to be doing some strange eyelid motion or palms exposed, which are seldom exposed to the sun when you're working. So this doesn't make sense, and it's not found in the scientific literature, right? So the maximum vitamin D production is, I couldn't find that there's a particular part of the body which maximizes vitamin D production. What I did find is that the entire body produces it in the skin. And so what we can do is to maximize vitamin D production, we would have to maximize skin exposure to the sun. And since a lot of people are taking antibiotics these days, which creates yeast infections, if you can be in a private area where you can have exposure to the private areas of your body, the pubic areas, to sunlight, that would be great, because that prevents yeast in those areas, which are always damp and moist, and can prevent yeast infections and prevent jock itch and some of these other things. It's a great idea to get out in the sun and maximize your production. We, as a family, enjoy Sabbath afternoons floating on the river, and that's a great time to get your maximum sun exposure by maximizing your skin and skin surface area to prevent yeast, fungus, and molds. So direct sun exposure for 2 to 3 hours a day on the face, arms, and hands. When we go out in the sun, will give you all the vitamin D that we need. In fact, they've also found that if you don't expose children, this is Joshua White's Better Late Than Early. You can find that on YouTube. Talks about basically blindness, glaucoma, and other diseases, myopathy, which is being unable to see, needing glasses. That is all prevented by exposing your children to 2 to 3 hours of sunlight in the day. It is critical. God says we should be out in the garden every day with our children and not playing indoors, not going inside of a barn and playing with dolls. God has said that for a particular reason, because it gives health and vigor to the body. And instead of playing with dolls and things like that, let's get out in the sunshine. Let's get out in the garden where we can really maximize our sun exposure.